Hello and welcome to a video about different states an object can be in. This is something I looked into because of a benchmark chart on the wiki about simple objects. Bar chart shows us 4 different states of the object and what impact they have on performance. I'm going to show you how to create these objects and what they do on a local server and a dedicated server. So this is a test scenario I made on the VR map. So as you can see in front of me, there are 4 objects and a trigger. I'll explain what they do from left to right. Trigger represents a super simple object. Super simple objects are simple objects that are created directly from the object shape. They have very limited functionality, do not contain type and cannot be retextured. The lack of type inaccessible of the original object's config renders super simple objects unsuitable for more complex objects like our vehicles. Super simple objects are useful for creating simple objects from objects that do not have config definition. To make such an object, you can't just change the checkmark, you need to use code. At the bottom of the wiki about simple objects, you'll find a function called create simple object, where you just have to fill in the class name as a parameter, the location. You also have to set the height because it might just spawn in the ground. Then the direction. Then if it's sloped with terrain, it's put on false here because VR terrain is flat. And then if you want it to be a super simple object. Next to this we have a simple object and the following definition. Simple objects represent simple object created from original object config. These simple objects contain type information which improves scripting capabilities, are automatically adjusted according to the config data and can be retextured. They are ideal for almost any situation with exception of objects that do not have config definitions, where using the super simple object is the only possible way, or complex objects that support retexturing, but we don't need it. Their using super simple objects cannot net some significant performance boost. Check performance section. Eden editor uses simple objects. There is currently no support for super simple objects in Eden. So how do you make a simple object? There are actually 2 ways. One that will always work and one that only works on some objects because it's a setting called simple object. The person who sets that is the modder and it has to be set in the config file. You can find the specifics on the simple object wiki. The fact that this object has that is determined by BIS. BIS thinks that this object in its simple object state has a performance benefit, so it would be better if this option was available to people. This option overrides the 2 options above it. So if you disable that or enable that, it will do nothing to the simple object. Then if we go back, this is a normal object. And here we have a handy little function that will run on init, and this will just replace it with a simple object. Also do it differently by going back to the trigger of the super simple object and replacing the last parameter from true to false, and then it will create a simple object. At the center we have a object where the enabled simulation is off. That means the physics and the animations are disabled. It's very simple to make one, just have to click the check mark next to enable simulation to be gone. This, however, works differently on a local multiplayer server and a dedicated server. Next to that we have a standard object. Don't really have anything to add to that. The last object we have is a hybrid between the 2 previous ones. It's called the dynamic simulated object. It can be simply made by turning on checkmark next to enable dynamic simulation. What this also does is override the enable simulation check. This is on, put down a bunch of objects to show the different effects they have. At the moment, let's focus on the wheelbarrows. You can see I lifted them up the air. Because these have physics, you can see that the normal simulated one already fell down and the dynamic simulated one is still up because we are not within range to start the simulation. Left of that, we have also a series of lights. You can also see that one is white. That means that it's on, and the other one is not on because we are also not in the activation range. If I get on my quad bike and zoom in a bit and forward, you'll see it goes on and it falls down. Right, now I'll go towards the fences or origin point and show you the differences, or at least show you how they interact on a local multiplayer server. First one, dynamic one. If I kill it, it falls over. Nothing weird about that. Next one, same story. The next one is supposed to be disabled and still falls over. In multiplayer, the dynamic simulation one will always receive damage no matter the state. Then we have the simple object, which is static. I will not be able to drive over this one. Next to that, we have the super simple one, same story. We will not be able to drive over it. Next to that, we have a dynamic simulated house. If we get out of the car, you'll see we can destroy the windows and we can open the doors and we're in. Same goes for the house next to it. However, the disabled simulation on this house will act differently on a dedicated server, which I will show you later. Next to that, we have our two simple objects. These interact like static, so if I shoot, you can see the window does break and I do not have any actions to open the door. Also note with simple objects that the penetration model still works even though they are static. They will not stop a bullet or an object in its tracks. Next to that we have the wheelbarrows that are physics objects. You can move those around. Next to this we have the lights. I'm gonna make it dark to show you a difference in dynamic simulation. So we've got helipad lights and normal lights. They are on, they transmit light. The helipad's lights here, the right ones work, the neighbor simulation one does not. Then the simple and the super simple also do not work. You can also see super simple is just blue because retexturing does not work on those. Also something you can maybe less clearly see in the dark is the simple one. The simple one has a bright yellow texture while the disabled simulation one still has a alpha texture. So let me show you what happens with the dynamic simulation if we drive backwards with lights. Or rather, to better demonstrate what happens when the animation gets disabled. So, backwards. Right. So if you see now, one of the helipad lights went out, while the other two lights remained. The state at which you leave the dynamic circle around the object retains the state it's in. So if I go closer, both lights start flashing. And if I time this properly, it should be possible to make the helipad light stay on and is now no longer simulated. This does raise a question about should this be on when you leave dynamic range, since if this lights up a helipad, kind of want to see it in the dark, and if the simulation distance is only 100 meters or so, it will be very hard to find it. Now I will just demonstrate on these vehicles what happens when simulation is on and off, and what happens if you hit a simple object with a, for example, rocket. You can see it stays the same, texture doesn't change. It is a static object. Same story with one next to that. And then the center one is the disabled simulation. Well, it has its animation and physics disabled. It will still change its texture when it's destroyed. Next to that, we've got the normal one. If we hit this, it will explode and start burning. And last, the dynamic simulation, which will do both. Well, first, simulation will be disabled. It will only look damaged, and if we get closer, it will start burning. Now we are on a dedicated server. It is one of the SUSE community servers. If you're interested in joining a Milsim community, there's a Discord link in the description. But back to topic, we have our wheelbarrows. One has fallen down, the other hasn't, because we're not dynamic range. But for the lights, something else happened, and it did come out. And I'm not sure why that is. So let's get closer. And there goes the wheelbarrow. It's a little more choppy than locally, but that is expected on the server. So now we're back at the fences. I'm gonna drive over to the dynamic one first. And it collapsed behind us. Now we're gonna go for the normal object. We hit it, it falls over. And last, the disabled simulation. As you can see, when you hit the disabled simulation one, it's destroyed. It has taken damage, but the animation has not been triggered to fall down, so it stays up. Then we have the simple objects. They remain static. To the other side, nothing really changes. Then we have the houses. The first two are still the same. I'm gonna just demonstrate that on the normal object. There goes the window and open door. Now I'll go to the disable simulation one, and you see the window doesn't break. And it appears like it's a simple object. Then I try to open the door and it does not want to work. Simple objects still act the same on a dedicated server. Now we're at the wheelbarrows. Also nothing different here. Then we have the lights. Let's go to dark, as you can see. Backwards, got them flashing, and the further we go, it stops. It's a bit hard to sync it up so that the light remains on. Okay, I've done it. So yeah, you can clearly see it works the same locally as on a dedicated. Then in front of us we have the vehicles. These also work the same as on the local. The texture changes if it's destroyed. Because damage gets transferred. The two simple objects will just remain the same as always. They don't really do anything. This one is destroyed, will burn. Then the last one, the dynamic one, will become disabled. See, texture's gone, the wheels are gone. Oh, the wheels are not gone yet, but it is clearly destroyed. If we get closer, it starts burning. And I've driven back after a while, and we see that the disabled simulation got updated by the network, and it's down. But it takes a while. If we go around, go to the center house where we shut the window, there is a chance that the window is gone, but the door remains closed. So disable simulation on a dedicated server is not reliable and should be used less. When in doubt, use dynamic simulation. So in conclusion, from left to right, use the simple ones if you're adding a lot of scenery objects that AI does not have to interact with, like cans or garbage on the ground. The center one, disabled simulation one, when you use this one, it's better recommended on large objects that do not change state, which also raises the question, what's the difference between the simple one and the disabled one? Then when do we use the normal model simulated one? We use it when we need something to work outside of the player's range, like a radar or maybe planes or a patrol. Then the dynamic simulation one, use it when in doubt. I hope this was helpful and will prepare you better to make educated guesses as to what object state should be in order to make the mission more performant. Thanks for watching.